Shabbat Shalom and welcome to our Torah studying community. My friends, you know that from the very beginning of these Facebook and YouTube-based weekly Torah teachings, I have been referring to those of us who share in this conversation as being part of a sacred community. We really are. We share a text, we exchange notes and reflections, we challenge and we question, and we care about each other. This past Shabbat morning, I had a real-life opportunity to learn once again about how a Torah-based community actually functions. Most of you know by now that last Saturday morning, University Synagogue and both campuses of Wilshire Boulevard Temple received vile, ugly, bomb threat emails at about 8:30 Saturday morning. The police had evacuated University Synagogue shortly before I got there to begin teaching my weekly Torah study class. What should we do? After expressing legitimate concerns, as a community, we decided not to leave, not to surrender the field to those who despise us, but if we would take a break from our study, that would be a loss. We couldn't enter a building. There was a total lockdown until the bomb squads had finished going through everything and making certain that, in fact, there was no physical danger. So we studied Torah on the sidewalk. We supported each other. Together we affirmed that Torah study is more than just a pleasant way to spend some free time. Torah study is the lifeblood of the Jewish people. The act of study is truly a sacred act. Each time that we enter into a meaningful conversation with our ancient texts, we are reaffirming who we are and we are strengthening the foundation of our own future. No one, no matter how vile, must ever be permitted to threaten that process. So let's continue our conversation this morning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Our sedra this morning, shlach lecha. What comes to your mind when someone uses the word spy? For Reese and me, and for all of those addicted to the Netflix series, The Americans, spies are American-appearing attractive couple surreptitiously living in our midst during the 50s and 60s, stealing our secrets, sending coded messages back to Moscow, disrupting our counterintelligence forces, and killing those who stood in their way, while socializing with an FBI agent who just happens to be their across-the-street neighbor. Or a spy is Jonathan Pollard, or Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, Mata Hari, or any number of characters in a John le Carré novel. But this week's Spies refers to 12 men, one from each tribe, princes of the people who were sent to check out the promised land, to see if it really was hospitable and whether the Israelites, fresh from Egyptian captivity, could readily conquer and occupy it. There is so much of interest here. The Hebrew tells us that the spies received a message, Latur et haaretz. That's what God wanted them to do. Latur et haaretz, to scout out the land. But Latur, scout out, has the same root from which we derive the contemporary Hebrew word tayarut, tourism. That's quite a strange linguistic association. Those men wanted to see all the land, though not necessarily for benign purposes. And since the story is well known, let me ask you, what did the spies bring back as evidence of the land's richness? What was it? Right, a huge cluster of grapes carried by two spies, to show that the land was Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, truly a land flowing with milk and with date honey. And that image just happens to be the image, the symbol of Israel's Mismad HaTayarut, the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. Tourism, spies, Latur. Fascinating, right? I would guess that the message is that spying is some form of low-cost tourism. But in any event, this story in the Torah, quickly enough, turns dark and doesn't end well. God is furious that the people need to check out to see whether that which God had promised them is indeed likely to be true. The rabbis, God bless them, use a terrible analogy here as they attempt to prove their point. They say it's like a king who selected a bride for his son, and now hear this, and the son insisted on seeing the bride first. The chutzpah not to accept his father's judgment. I'm sure that we would all agree that the son deserved significant punishment for not trusting his father, even as the Israelites deserved the punishment that they would receive later on for agreeing with the majority of the returned spies who were intimidated by what they had seen. In fact, the spies felt physically diminished in the presence of the people already living in Canaan. We were kechagavim, they said. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Therefore, that entire generation from this would be condemned never to enter the land, but rather to wander the desert for 40 years until they have almost all died out. The Israelites had refused to trust in God. Rather, they chose to trust those whose words substantiated their fears. I'm reminded of a segment of the Birkat HaMazon, quoting, of course, the prophet Jeremiah, that says, Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach Baronai. Blessed is the person who trusts in God, and in no one or no thing else. What a fascinating topic. So whom do we trust? An infant, a child, trusts her parents. Until the real world intervenes, and that perfect trust is reshaped by the tides of reality. A student trusts his teacher to share with him objective truth, only to discover that such truth is not easily available in many, if not most, academic disciplines. The personal, the autobiographical of the teacher often finds a way, wittingly or unwittingly, into the interpretive process. So what do? We turn then to our peers, our colleagues, our loved ones to never let us down. We trust that when we ask them for advice, their advice will not be tarnished by their own self-interest. We trust them to keep our confidences. We trust them to have our backs. And often they will indeed keep faith with us, and that's great. But when they fail us, when our idols collapse, when icons of reliability prove to have feet of clay, when promises solemnly made are set aside, ignored, or denied for whatever reason, the effect upon us can be devastating. My friends, we human beings need to be able to trust, to have others in our lives whom we can rely upon, not to cheat us, not to mislead us, not to deceive us. We cannot survive without trust. It all begins, I suspect, with learning to trust ourselves. By listening to that still small voice that we call conscience, as it seeks to guide us through life, wherever it comes from, however it develops, that still small voice seems meant to serve as what? An internal gyroscope, a moral gyroscope, the bedrock of trust. But in time, we can begin to doubt that what we see and how we see is accurate. How can I be sure? And is it acceptable to swim against the tide? So we turn to others. We look for external validation. We want to be told, in the words of a very wonderful 1969 text, I'm okay, you're okay. We need validation. We want less ambiguity, more certainty. So what? Not finding it out there, not finding it here, we turn to books, we turn to religion, we turn to God, we turn to gurus and rebbes and all sorts of self-help specialists. We turn to our mental health professionals. We turn to groups that assure us that their way is the best way to a life of confidence and trust. But everything ultimately turns back on itself at the end of the day. If we cannot trust ourselves, then no other source of trust will ever provide what we need. The Israelites gave up on themselves and they paid a terrible price. So on this Shabbat, we pray that we may learn to listen better, to care more, to our own inner voices, telling us that we matter, warning us away from broken bridges and roads that lead nowhere. Only when we trust in ourselves can we recapture trust in the world around us. May we learn to gain that trust and feel more secure in the world in which we live. Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Oh, lest I forget, please, please share. Hit share before you go and have a cup of coffee or something, and that'll be great. Have a wonderful Shabbat and a wonderful week.